So, talk a little bit about then what kind of stuff was going on in and out of the towers or 7 as far as financial transactions.
I don't know where to start. This is
a
the
lot.
problem. Where the hell do you start? If you ask most students of history on this subject, they'll trace the origins of 9/11 back to like 1998, when Osama bin Laden said, "Hey, we're doing jihad against the U.S." And this Mohammed Atta, who was in the Hamburg group in Germany, said, "Oh, yeah, we'll take care of anything you need done for you." But in reality, you'd have to go way back. I mean, okay, so here's the story. Investigate it yourself. Project Hammer, like the hammer that you bang on. Write that down, because you'll need to really, and buckle your seatbelt, because this goes back to the end of World War II. So,
really?
Yes. The treasury of the Japanese Empire, all of their gold was moved to the Philippines and was buried by General Yamashita, and it's the Golden Lily treasure, otherwise known as Yamashita's gold. Something around 300,000 metric tons of gold.
Whoa.
Now, when the Japanese went through the Far East, they went through with a vacuum cleaner. I have a collection of their wartime notes, but for example, they would go into Indonesia, and they would take all the gold from everywhere, like house by house. And then they would, the treasury would, of course, be raided, the central bank would be emptied, and then they would issue their own fiat paper money for the residents to use, and then move on to the next country. And they did this all through Southeast Asia, leading up to World War II.
So this was in 1910, 20, 30?
No, 30s mostly.
Okay.
30s and
they just raped and pillaged, huh?
They did indeed.
Just went right through.
And the Bataan Death March and all those sorts of things. They kind of ran rampshod over the Far East and gathered up all of the gold and took it to the Philippines and buried it. Okay?
300,000
metric tons of gold.
300,000
metric tons of gold.
And they buried it in the Philippines.
That's right.
About when?
Well, we know now why MacArthur said he would return.
I'm coming back for the gold.
I'm coming back for the gold. Yeah, in the early 40s.
Okay.
Yeah. Towards the end of the war.
All right. And that's called Yamashita's gold.
Yamashita's gold, yeah. And there was an intelligence agent, General MacArthur's chief of intelligence, Charles Willoughby, and he had two goons, Edward Lansdale and another guy whose last name is Santa Romana. He's got a long first name, 3 or 4 of them, in fact. So last name Santa Romana for you folks that are going to research. And I urge you to do so. So they captured the driver, Yamashita's driver, and tortured him, waterboarded him, until he told them where the gold was. And so then they went and found all of this gold. So Lansdale kicks it up the ladder, and he calls John McCloy. You may remember John McCloy. Later on went on to be president of the World Bank. And they said, hey, we've got all this gold. What do you want to do about it? And not only was it visible, but there was a lot that was still buried that they were digging up until like 20 years ago. This according to the story. So they told those guys, look, get down there and recover that treasure. So it was almost like a mining operation. And so right about that time, there was this a revolution in the Philippines, and they had to confiscate the land, which they did. And once they...
Who's they?
The guys in that group, Willoughby, Lansdale, Santa Romana, the people that were in charge of the Philippines at the time. Because, we didn't give them back their liberty. But essentially, they paralleled and removed as much of this gold as they could. Now, the Black Eagle Trust, which was a similar operation involving Nazi gold, and many people understand what happened there. A lot more information about it has come out. In fact, suits were settled in recent years with these Swiss-German banks that held all of this illegal gold. So the Black Eagle Trust was well known, but the Golden Lily they didn't understand as much.
And that's the Yamashita's gold.
Yamashita's gold, yeah.
The gold.
And I suppose if you wanted to do a general search to learn about this, Yamashita's gold would be a good search term. There have been a couple of books written on the subject. There's great evidence to suggest that this is a real, true story. So essentially, they decided to take this gold and use it to build institutions that would grow to become, the most prominent institutions in the world. Citibank, Chase Manhattan, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corp, Union Bank of Switzerland, and Bankers Trust.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So why would these guys who were in charge of this operation out of the Philippines, they were like the genesis of the boys, the bankers?
Essentially. And, so all through the 50s and 60s, they're digging around out there to try to find, whatever they can. But meanwhile, Marcos, you remember Ferdinand?
Ferdinand, sure. The lady with the shoes, right?
Yeah, with the shoes. He actually found some stashes of it himself. And so he got together with this guy named Adnan Khashoggi. You remember him, the arms dealer? He was a big arms dealer in the 70s. And they were siphoning off this gold and selling it into the open market. So you recall what happened to Marcos?
No.
Come on.
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, we liberated the Philippines.
yes,
Chased
we
them
did.
out of there, installed a new. Well, this was 85, 86. And the gold was taken over from Marcos and put into those banks that I mentioned, taken out of the Philippines and put into Citibank, Chase, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Bankers Trust. And then this entity appeared, on which, of course, George H.W. Bush was on the advisory board of this company called Barrick Gold.
Oh, we know those.
Yeah, we should. Because Barrick Gold was tied to Adnan Khashoggi, Edgar Bronfman, and Frank Nugan of the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia. Yeah. Curious that Nugan's family ran the shipping operation between the U.S. Navy base in the Philippines and Australia. So he had the means to actually get the stuff onto boats and get it out of there. So Barrick Gold pops up out of nowhere, and the Barrick operation would start cranking out billions and billions of dollars in paper gold. So all through the 90s, people were wondering, where the hell is all this gold coming from?
What do you mean paper gold?
Well, gold contracts.
Okay, contracts. Okay.
Yeah. And gold derivatives, right?
Okay.
Options, futures, contracts. But this entire organization sprang up around Barrick for the sole purpose of selling these gold futures. And one of them was named Enron.
No.
Yes. And so Enron, Barrick, of course, has no mining operations that anyone can point to. It's like, where's this stuff coming from? Where's this gold coming from? Well, one of the things they bought, two of them actually, were refineries, gold refineries. On the Italian border near Milan, there were these two gigantic refineries that were cranking out bars of gold, and both were owned by Barrick. Cranking out bars of gold that were then put into the market. So Barrick's producing this gold that no one knows where it's coming from, and marketing it through an entity whose investigation at the time there was all these allegations of gold price fixing. This is when again, for those students of history who are just now discovering GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, GATA, which was at that time saying, wait a minute, something's not right. We know the production of gold. There's more gold on the market than there's being produced. Where's it coming from? No one can figure it out. And Barrick was the subject of an investigation into gold price fixing. Now, I'm going to give you one guess where the records of this investigation were kept.
Building 7.
Now close. 23rd floor of the North Tower, where the FBI office was kept. So obviously the loaned gold that was flooding the market for that decade, no one knew where it came from.
So this investigation of all what you've just said in the last 15 minutes was all at the 23rd floor of the North Tower.
That's right.
How do you know all this stuff?
Well, because there's information out there. There's several FBI agents and public information that, is so extensive. Because remember, this goes back to the 1940s.
Sure.
So, in a lifetime, a lot of people tell their stories.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. They're on their way out and they tell their story. And
Yeah.
then that little piece of the story gets added in. So the Golden Lily treasure is the source of the loan gold that flooded the market. But we have to go further in that in September of 1991, George H.W. Bush, this is
Senior.
Poppy Bush,
Poppy.
and Alan Greenspan decided that they were going to use these Brady bonds. I don't know if you remember the Brady bonds.
I remember the Brady Boys.
Yeah.
Or Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch.
But not the Brady Bonds.
Well, this is another key element that you need to research in order to understand the genesis of this story, is that in September of 1991, George H.W., Senior, right, and Alan Greenspan financed $240 billion worth of bonds, Brady bonds, and put together this Operation Hammer. And the object of Operation Hammer was to use that $240 billion to go into the Soviet Union and buy as much of Soviet industry that they could. And this was the Vulcan Group, which is another search term that you want
Spell
to
that for me.
Vulcan, like
VULCAN.
VULCAN.
So let me stop a minute. So Poppy Bush and Greenspan get together in 91, and they sell $240 billion worth of paper, and they raise $240 billion worth of money from their friends.
Right.
To do what? To go into Russia?
Destabilize the ruble.
Oh.
And put it was the end of the Cold War, right? We were
do something here.
Yeah, we were going to whack Russia in the head. So we started out by
crazy. This is what these people do when they don't have nothing else to do, right?
Yeah.
Huh.
So in March of 1991, Boris Yeltsin, who you'd have to study Boris Yeltsin to see where he came from. He was not a he was a construction foreman. Sure. He wasn't a big hot shot. They
that liked his vodka.
Yeah, they dragged him up to the front and said, "Here, you do this." They paid for his entire campaign, and what his job was to allow the Russian treasury to be looted, and it was something like 2,000 tons of gold, like $35 billion was looted from the Russian treasury, and this, of course, stopped them from being able to defend the ruble.
So Yeltsin, since he was their made man,
right,
he sold the gold to who?
To the boys.
To the boys.
Yeah, and the names is a Riggs Bank, the Riggs Valmet operation. They were like a bit player in the Iran-Contra scandal, but Riggs Bank, R-I-G-G-S Bank, became the controlling owner of Valmet. Valmet, I think is the way. And you'll find Robert Maxwell in this mix. He was the British financial guy that tied the Mossad, which is the Israeli Secret Service, into the operation, and he kind of acted as the front man for the boys. So he was in there selling all of the military weapons to Iran and to the Nicaraguan Contras. That whole Contra affair was all tied to Robert Maxwell and George Soros.
Whoa.
George Soros.
Maxwell and Soros.
So Maxwell and Soros created that Durham Trust. Durham Trust was the war chest that had been created with that Marcos gold. Now, curiously, Robert Maxwell drowned on his yacht, and one of the senators, Tower. What the hell was Tower's first name? Anyway, if you may, he died in a plane crash, kind of like the guy who died in the car crash. He died in a plane crash in April of 1991, and Riggs Bank was working its way through the Russian treasury and Russian critical industries. So now they bought everything. They bought Yukos. They bought, all of the major oil drillers in Russia. They bought all of Russian industry, anything that was everything.
This Brady Trust.
Yes.
Brady Bonds.
The guys with the Brady Bonds from the Durham, Durham Trust.
So this was how the boys with destabilized Russia.
Yeah.
In the early 90s.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. And we talked about how the Rothschild financial interests were the backers of this whole thing, and that all came to light when the guy from Yukos, the front man that was sent in to Yukos Oil, was arrested by the Russians and put in jail. And they were taking the industrial assets of Yukos, and they were going to auction them off. And the Rothschild family popped up and said, "Well, no, it wasn't really his; it's ours," and so they kept it. And this was the first revelation at the time that Yukos Oil was, in fact, owned by or controlled by the N.M. Rothschild Continuation Trust.
And how was Rothschild involved with the whole Golden Lily thing?
Oh, they were involved in everything.
Oh, because they were involved with the people that were doing the gold.
Correct.
All the gold thing.
And there's no way that an operation of this size could have been undertaken without the blessing and involvement of, the preeminent money power on earth. So make no mistake, that's who that is, the N.M. Rothschild, Five Arrows Group out of Curacao, and various other entities that they own and control by the N.M. Rothschild Continuation Trust. It's not even a corporation, folks. It's a pure trust organization. So they ended up controlling Gazprom and Yukos Oil, which are essentially the entire Russian industry. That was it.
They own it all.
They own it all.
So they control Putin.
They control everything. So when it comes to Russia, the stability of Russia was completely decimated in 1991, and it was all funded by about $250 billion worth of Brady bonds. And guess which day the Brady bonds were coming due?
No.
Yes.
No.
Not September 11th, 2001, but September 12th, 2001.
The next day.
The next day.
What do you mean coming due?
They were due. They're 10-year bonds. September 1991, September 2001. So now, all of a sudden, whoever had these bonds, which very likely that the firms handling them would have been Cantor Fitzgerald or Euro Brokers, which were the two largest government bond firms in the country. And you know where they were. One was in Tower 1 on the 23rd floor, and the other was in Tower 2. So $240 billion were
going to have to be paid out to somebody.
The next day.
The next day on September 12th, 2001.
Correct.
And they didn't have to be after the towers fell because the whole thing was...
Well, what's curious...
Because people still had their own paperwork.
They did indeed. And a majority of bonds now, and even then, are conducted through a FedWire or through electronic transfer. There's, the paper section of it is rare, but here's what's very important about this, is that there are trading rules that the SEC has, and I think it's Rule 15C. And 15C talks about blind brokers. So you can't just sell a treasury bond without identifying who you are. And you certainly couldn't do that before September 11th.
You can't sell or buy or both?
You can't do either.
Okay.
Because there are rules that, the SEC lifted that day. And they said, well, you know what, if you have a blind broker and you don't know who the transaction is, well, then go ahead. We'll allow that transaction to go forward. So the Federal Reserve as well as the Securities and Exchange Commission relaxed their rules so that, I mean, there was no way that you were going to clear $240 billion in hidden securities without somebody knowing, hey, wait, where are all these bonds coming from? And that's exactly what would have happened. So I talk about, and I've talked about this before, how the Fed stood up that day and said, if you're owed money by anyone, and because the number of fails, there's even a good Federal Reserve report if you want to read it. Fails are defined as when somebody has a contract to deliver you securities and they don't deliver them.
Right.
Then there's a security fail. And there are only two banks that clear securities for these brokers. One is J.P. Morgan, and the other is Bank of New York. That's it. There's no other clearing bank that you could have used. Now, the actions by these two entities in the days and months following 9/11 would have facilitated hiding that volume of transactions. The Federal Reserve increased the monetary supply by $300 billion
on 9/11.
Well, in the weeks
after.
Yeah,
they just create the money, and
money that was largely used to pay the $240 billion in bonds. In fact, even the Wall Street Journal said, excuse me. There is every reason to believe activities in the Bank of New York in the aftermath of September 11 are worthy of suspicion. At one point during the week after September 11th, the Bank of New York publicly reported to be overdue on $100 billion in payments.
Whoa. For these Brady bonds.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you got an account bubble of $100 billion, which was essentially the tip or the top of the entire crisis. It probably took them about 4 or 5 days to clear them all out. But in that very short span, while everyone was focused on everything else, $240 billion worth of these securities was laundered, washed, destroyed, whatever you want to say. Their existence was not publicly revealed as it would have been on September 12th. So these securities were moved off the balance sheet, from off the balance sheet to the balance sheet, and that is the crux of the crime. Took the stuff from under the table and put it up on the table for everyone to see, so none of the activities that led up to it were ever revealed. In fact, we just had that big of an increase in the money supply, and no one understood why.